It's week 2 and we're on to Legal Compliance, Chapter 2, Part 1. One of Canada's selling features on the world stage is our diversity. From a corporate point of view, diversity provides you with a wider pool of talent and greater insight into the needs and behaviors of our diverse customer base. Government fosters diversity through employment equity laws, and we encourage the respect of each and every individual. It's important for you to understand the legal framework of human resource management in Canada. Approximately 10% of employers and employees are covered federally, while the other 90% are covered provincially or territorially. It's important for you to understand that if working in another province or territory in the country, you better know the law. This chart illustrates the difference between federally regulated versus the provincial or territorial responsibilities. Where does your job fit in? All jurisdictions across the country have human rights legislation. The purpose of this legislation is to remove discrimination. It's important to note that there are two main areas of discrimination. One, the direct discrimination, which is the obvious, like treating somebody differently based on their race, color, religion, versus the indirect discrimination, which are those hidden ones like policies and practices within a company that may discriminate. For example, height and weight requirements often exclude women and minorities. It's important for you to know the different prohibitive grounds. Race and color, national or ethnic origin, religion or religious creed, age, sex, including pregnancy and childbirth, sexual orientation, marital and family status, physical or mental disabilities, including drug and alcohol addictions, and pardon convictions are all prohibitive grounds for discrimination in Canada. Employers in Canada can't treat somebody differently based on any of the prohibitive grounds. It's also important to note that employers have a duty to accommodate. For example, if an employee has an alcohol problem, it's considered an illness, and therefore they are required to accommodate that. Also, other examples could include the necessity of having to buy a different type of chair or desk for someone that has been injured and requires some kind of accommodation. Where the buck stops is if it causes undue hardship for an employer. For example, a small business on a second floor would not be expected to put in an elevator. The duty to accommodate goes well beyond medical treatment and disabilities. It also includes religious reasons. Of course, with all rules, there are those exceptions. We refer to them as bona fide occupational requirements in human resources. That is basically a justified reason for discrimination. For example, fitness requirements for firefighters and police require that they have a certain level of fitness in order to do the job. Site requirements for truck drivers are also considered a necessity. You get the picture. In Canada, harassment is any behavior that demeans, humiliates, or embarrasses a person. We're all too familiar with sexual harassment, but there is another form of harassment, psychological harassment, that happens all too often in the workplace. Something like workplace bullying would be considered psychological harassment. I spoke earlier about employment equity. There are 4 designated groups: women, visible minorities, Aboriginals, and persons with disabilities. Another protection is the protection of privacy. Did you know that there's a Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act? This act really provides the private sector with guidelines as to how it can collect, use, or disclose personal information about you. If you've worked in Ontario, you would be familiar with employment labor standards. Minimum wages, overtime pay, hours of work, public holidays, vacation, benefits, parental leave, layoffs, and terminations are all covered. The last piece of legislation we're going to talk about is pay equity. It provides equal pay for equal work, or equal pay for equal work of equal value. And what it has attempted to do is address the wage gap, particularly between men and women. Enforcement of these laws come from the Human Rights Commission and the Privacy Commission. It's important to familiarize yourself with these before moving into the workplace. Remember the laws about doing the right thing. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., the old law about an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. The time is always right to do the right thing. Next week, we're going to talk about health and safety. Now it's time for you to get to work. Check out assignment 1, Shop Talk.